Welcome to a new segment on decentralized opportunity that we're calling Send Us a Text. Yes, from here on out, when you check the show notes of any future DOP episodes, whether it's YouTube or your podcast player, you'll see a link at the top titled Send Us a Text Message. At the beginning of each episode, we're going to ask one question, usually related to the topic or interview at hand, and we encourage you to click that link and tell us your thoughts or answer to that week's question. The most inspiring, engaging, or just downright interesting response will be read on our next episode. Help us learn more about you, your experiences, and your thoughts as we continue to explore the entrepreneurial world in often unconventional and overlooked areas. So for our first audience question, to commemorate our amazing guest tonight, Tim Denhode of Major Talent, if you are or previously were in the military, which military skill do you find most useful in your civilian job now? Click that link in the show notes. Let us know. We would love to talk more with you.
So what are some of the challenges that someone might have in leaving the military and start building their career in this civilian world?
There's two sides to the challenge, right? So the side of the veteran is one side. The side of the employer is also a challenge. There's challenges on both sides, and it's like, how do you connect those two? Everybody's transition throughout this journey is always going to be unique and different to them. You know, I've talked to some vets, they're like myself, you know, I did everything right, postured myself perfectly. I did a lot of jobs that related to the civilian sector all the way through. And then landing a job really wasn't that difficult. I had my transitional things, but there's others that didn't quite have that easy. How do you find a job, right? So like we go through this. Everybody, when we separate, we all have to go through it's called TAPS class. If I use an acronym, I'm gonna try to explain it. So TAPS stands for a Transition Assistance Program, and we're all supposed to go through that, right? So like from the ranks of colonel all the way through general, and then like the E9, the enlisted grade of 9, the highest enlisted rank, like those guys get to go through an executive course, so that their experience is a little bit different. But I always remember I went through TAPS twice. So like my military career, my first time I was an infantry Marine my first 4 years, and then my last 16 I was in the Air Force. So I went through TAPS twice, one for different branches, almost the same content, almost 20 years later. So we're still checking the same box, right? So, but I'll never forget when I was going through my last TAPS class, we got to the resume writing portion, and I'm sitting here next to this other guy, and we're all writing resumes, and of course I'm not taking a lot serious and just goofing off with the guy next to me. And then the guy on the other side, he's got this really serious look on his face, and I'm like, dude, you good? And he goes, no. He's like, I'm a nuclear targeteer. He's like, there is nobody in the civilian sector that is going to hire a nuclear targeteer. And I'm like, my initial thought was like, I want to make a joke about this. But then like, as I'm reading his face, I'm like, this guy doesn't need a joke right now. Like, this guy is serious. Like, what's going on? And I was like, you know what? Let's talk about some other things. Like, let's talk about data. Let's talk about analytics. Like, how do you analyze that data? And we started to go down that road a little bit. And you can just see like, it was like the wall was starting to crumble. He's like, okay, so that makes sense. Like, this is how I'm relating. This is how I'm connecting. And so like, there's so many things that we do like in this very structured environment to go to this unstructured environment of the civilian sector, right? So like we all handle it different, and we all have different areas of that where we're like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this, right? So like it starts with the resume piece, like the other thing is like the uniform stuff. Like, I don't know if you guys ever seen the memes where it's like, you know how to tell if somebody was in the military, like how they dress, how they walk, how they talk, whatever. Yeah. We wore a uniform for the last however many years. Nobody told me what to wear. And all of a sudden I have to find clothes that match. So yeah, there's a lot of different areas I think that people will struggle with, that the veterans will struggle with.
You mentioned employers. What is kind of their challenge in hiring on veterans or military type of people?
Understanding what we do is important. A lot of times we connect to the job that we did while we were in the service. And I need to peel that back a little bit, right? Because like From the employer side, I need to talk about a couple of areas. I need to talk about the employer side, like we just mentioned, but I also need to talk about how did we get to this? How do we get to where we're at in the service? Like, how does that job selection process work? Because like that's important, and not a lot of people spend any time thinking about how did I get to that, right? So the employer side, they don't understand the acronyms. Like we're 1% of the US population is veterans. Like, so for people to understand what those, and Tanner, you got a IT background, like an IT recruiting background. Like you think about all the acronyms and stuff that you guys have there, you're in a whole new world, right? So, and it's the same for us, you know? So part of when I always pitch, I'm always like, I've been on both sides of the recruitment table. I've been on the side saying, hey, I need a job, but I've been on the other side of actually trying to hire folks, right? So, but well, I will see a veteran on the one side, and then the company's got this job description saying, you know, hey, I'm looking for a vehicle mechanic that has some leadership experience, that can run our fleet of vehicles. Those things, yeah, I get it. So, but then we have the veteran on the other side of the table going, hey, I'm a 2T351. I was NCOIC of the motor pool. And your recruiter's going, what? We no, you know, I need this. And they're like, well, I can do that. So understanding what we say, like we use acronyms like NCO and OIC and NCOIC and the platoon, the squad. It's like our units of measure are different. Our ranks are different. Our titles are different. Our job codes are different. And I'm telling you, man, like every branch of the service has a vehicle mechanic, but we don't call them something different. We have a different job code for every single one, right? So, and so from the employer side, like there's employers that they intentionally want to hire vets. So what they do is they take this resume and they're like, hey, Tim, you're an Army guy. Can you tell me what this Air Force person did? You're like, nope. You know, so like understanding what we did is so hard, right? So like, and that's why like one of the challenges is like the national average time spent on a resume is 7 seconds. So what do you look at in that 7 seconds, and how do you translate that 7 seconds of time? Like what are you looking at on the real estate page that's going to get you that enough to buy in, right? Like, so that's tough. So the translation is really hard to understand for employers. Another thing, like a lot of people don't think about it, is like, for example, from an employer, like the feedback, right? It's like in the service, when you check into an organization, you're supposed to have formal feedback in the first 60 days. It's like your initial feedback. And then you're supposed to get feedback in 6 months, and then you get an annual feedback. So after a certain ranks that you're in, it's like your initial feedback and then your annual. But until you've been in for like 10 years, you're supposed to get it like 3 times or 2 times a year, every 6 months. So unless somebody says, hey, Tim, you're doing a crappy job, I'm not going to change my behavioral pattern, right? So like that's hard. So when you go to an employer is like, man, I wish Tim would change his behavior. I wish Tim would do this and Tim would do that. Like, you're not telling me I need to do anything different, so I'm not going to make any changes, right? So like we are used to, you could be blunt with us and be like, hey, you're not working. Like this isn't working. You're not going to hurt our feelings. That's what we're used to. But from civilian employers, they're like, well, can I say that? Can I address that? Can I talk to that? Another thing, like the employers, and this is tough, right? Because like we have different branches. We all have a combat specific jobs. Like there's infantry guys, there's artillery, combat engineers. Like that's a struggle for those veterans to say, what can I do? Like I could do, you know, you don't have infantry guys. Like, and I can relate to that. My first 4 years, I got out of the Marine Corps. I was an infantry guy, and the only people that were knocking on my door was law enforcement and security forces, and I'm our security. And I'm like, guys, I grew up on a farm. I could fix stuff. I could build. I could do literally anything. And they didn't, like, that wasn't a translatable thing, right? It's like people didn't get that. So those things are difficult, right? So like a lot of employers, especially like the smaller organizations, if they have the employee resource group, a lot of them get it, right? Because they already have veterans internally saying, hey, we can help. But for somebody to think that, you know, maybe this guy has PTSD, like that's the you know, the term, right? So and that's another thing that employers struggle with. Like, how do I talk to you about this? Like, how do I ask you questions about PTSD without you feeling like you're getting attacked. Like those are serious conversations to have. Like for somebody that has a significant life changing event, like that anniversary date doesn't go away, right? So, but how do you address that? How do you identify that? And like, what are those conversations that actually overcome some of those things? You know what I mean? So, like from the employer's perspective, there's so much that can be learned. And what's interesting is like in this journey of major talent, the company I founded was when I get a pitch and when I talk to employers, they're truly genuinely asking that specific question that has come up on almost every pitch. Like, okay, so when I hire veterans, one, how do I retain them? How do I keep them? And two, how do I help them with the offboarding from the service and the onboarding onto our organization? Like what makes the most sense there? So like there's a mutual interest there. It just has to be, help facilitate that. So, yeah, I was going to talk about the onboarding process, like the job selection. Is that cool if I chat about that a little bit?
Please. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So
Don't let us stop you.
well, you can if you want. So when we go through when we join the service, right? We get qualified. I'm going to talk about the enlisted side. So we have the enlisted and we have the officers. Two different career tracks, I guess, if you will. So we qualify you 3 different areas: morally, academically, and physically. So that moral qualification is we talk about your drug usage, tickets, but if you have minors, that kind of thing, right? So like, what are those moral issues? The second thing is physical qualifications. So that's when we go through the military entrance processing station. We check your color vision, your depth perception, your hearing, and we call it the underwear Olympics, where you basically strip down your underwear, you walk around like a duck.
Duck walk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I have my own flashbacks from just MEPS. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I call it the underwear Olympics. I used to be a recruiter for the Air Force, and everyone's like, underwear Olympics? That sounds weird. I'm like, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the physical qualification side, right? And then the last part is the academic. The academic qualification is based off of your high school. Do you have a diploma? Do you have college degree? Associate, bachelor's. Like, what level of degree do you have? And then the final part is the ASVAB. It stands for the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So as a recruiter, when you enter the service, we take all 3 of those categories, and we show you all the jobs that you're qualified to do. And then we take like 90% of them, wipe them off the table. And we're like, all right, this is what you're qualified for, and this is what's available. So interestingly, this is because, every branch has their mission, right? Like the Army has their mission. They have a combat mission. Marines, like everybody has a combat mission, but a lot of the combat mission, some of those skills are not translatable, right? Like nobody in the civilian sector, I'm going to go shoot artillery for, Bass Pro. So, it would make the fishing experience a little bit
Would be
different.
interesting.
Yeah. So that's what happens. So this test shows us where your strengths are. Like if your strengths are high mechanically as an 18-year-old, it ain't like you're 26 and all of a sudden you forget how to turn a wrench. If you were mechanically inclined at 18, at 24, 25, 26, like you're still mechanically inclined. You just have a better understanding of it. So and same thing with electrical. Like if you're electrically inclined, you still understand what voltage and watts and ohms and amps and stuff does, right? Like you don't just forget that. You just have a better understanding the more that you're around it. And so I have a lot of people like hated that test, that they're like, this is the stupidest test ever. I'm like, I love that test because it tells me so much about you and so much about where you're going to go, right? So like if I took your entrance test and I said, I'm looking to fill 10 maintenance technician positions, but I have 10 infantry guys, they all scored high on their mechanical area of their ASVAB test, they could plug right into a pipeline so fast and just be trained. And like the companies would take them in a heartbeat, right?
In the traditional corporate world, hiring, it's all about risk aversion.
Yeah.
And it feels like transitionary skills get no play
Yeah.
in the job world. It's all about like, how much have you done specifically with what we're asking for? I need a certain amount of years of doing that. And I could really see, like, again, like you're talking about somebody who has a military background where it doesn't translate one to one, not getting those access to those opportunities. So do you work specifically with the companies then to show them like how this skill set would then transition to what they're asking for, or how does that all play out?
When I initially started Major Talent, right? So like there's a couple of things, and my entire career I've always seen stuff that was trending or was about to trend before it actually did. And I've literally built my entire career around that. And I think that there's a lot of the successes that I've had have been attributed to that foresight, right? Um, I I know hate's a really strong word, but I hate resumes. I hate job descriptions. I hate position descriptions, performance reports. Like they're so subjective and fluffy. Why, like think back to like when you had a performance report, right? Like you did 5% of this stuff, but you had to fill up 77 lines of stuff that you did over the last year. And you're like, dude, did I even do this? But so those things are so fluffy, right? So, but what happens when we go through this TAPS class that I talked about earlier? The first thing they say is we're going to start writing a resume. Grab all those performance reports and let's start writing bullets out of those performance reports. I'm like, you did 5% of the stuff that's in there. You're like, what are we doing? So, so that was one of the things that I said when I initially started this thing. I was like, you know what? I'm done with the subjective. We have to go objective. Like we have to be skills based. Like everything we do has to be skills based. Like every job we have, there's skills associated with those jobs, right? So like one of the things like a Bradley linebacker crewman, there is nobody in a construction environment that has a Bradley linebacker in their fleet of vehicles, you know? However, somebody that was a crewman on a Bradley linebacker understands the schematics, the hydraulics, the pneumatics, the mechanical, like everything about that, right? So like the skills that you have for that career are so translatable across the board, right? But so many times we get stuck on the fact of this is who I was. So we identify as our rank, we identify as our career field, our job, whatever that was. Like I was the NCOIC of this, or I was this. Like we don't focus on those skills that have to be like, that's what the employers want to see, right? So when I started Major Talent, that was the one thing that I said, I'm going with the skills based, and it's different, right? Like the approach of what I'm doing is entirely different. So a lot of the process today, and so when I started, I got to back up. So when I retired, I partnered with American Corporate Partners, ACP. And this is a nonprofit organization where they basically will take veterans and they will partner them up with somebody that's on the civilian sector that said, hey, I'm interested in mentoring a veteran on their way out, like helping them with the offboarding process. I was partnered up with a lady from Caterpillar, huge organization. They're amazing. She was phenomenal. I'm not going to name drop on here, but she was phenomenal. And she helped me with my resume. She helped me with some interview prep. She helped me with all the things. I was like, I got this. But when I talked to her, I'm like, I didn't have this, right? So she was phenomenal. Loved that program. When I said, hey, I'm going to start Major Talent because I need to, I reached out to her. I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I was like, I'm taking this and I'm gonna give a resume because we're still stuck in that era. Like that's one part of things that happens through Major Talent. I said, but I'm taking everything and making it skills based. And she was like, you know what? You're ahead of the curve on this. When we talk about what is happening and like in the SHRM side of things, the HR world, she goes, we're starting to transition that. We're starting to take, and they were at that time starting to transition their position and job descriptions to skills based. So that was one thing. She's like, you're ahead of the curve on this. I'm like, great, that's where I want to be, right? And just this week, Office of Personnel Management, OPM, this is the one that hires all the civilians for the Department of Defense. They just came out this week and they said we need to start transitioning over to a skills based approach. I'm like, I got you guys. I'm already ahead of you.
So to clarify, I think the second part of Tanner's question, do you not only work with veterans who are transitioning, but you work with corporate clients or hiring companies to help them also understand and translate this? So you're kind of melding the two together and creating an understanding in between.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I need to talk about the veteran side first, right? So like there is a lot of effort that trying to help veterans as we separate, right? Like that transition, there's 200,000 vets every year that get out of the service and we try to transition into the civilian sector. Like if you think about that, that's an amazing funnel, right? What about that pool that's at the bottom? Like when we talk about rural Nebraska, for example, like the company, when I recruited, I got the exact same questions then, back in 2004 to 2007, that I'm getting today. When I recruited from a farmer, because I recruited up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, love the rural community. I grew up on a farm, so I can relate, right? So I'm talking to these guys, and I would have farmers like, you could see the emotion on their faces. They're like, okay, so you're taking my kid. How do I get my kid back? And I'm like, that's between you and your child. Like if they want to come back and work on the farm, like that's okay, but they're going to come back better. Like they're going to be a better mechanic. They're going to, whatever, right? But that was something that was an obstacle that I always had to overcome in the rural side. But now today, when I talk to companies that have these rural footprints, they're asking me the same question, like, okay, how do I find veterans to fill these rural spots? Like if I'm looking to fill 10 positions in Grand Island, how do I find vets? If I want vets because of what they can bring to the table, like how do I find them? And that's literally the struggle that I hear all the time, right? So here's what we're doing, and why, to your question of do we take care of both sides? So yeah, so like our strategy, like organizationally, like I have two targets. Like I have the candidate target and I have the employer target, because there's no cost at all ever for our veterans, for our candidates on the employer side. Like this is a free service to them. So the employers pay to have access, right? So what we're doing different. So we'll talk about the process today. The process today says, if I find a job, and this is where a lot of the efforts today are actually pushed out. Like everybody wants to know, hey, what are the jobs that I should be applying for? So the efforts that we're surrounded today says, hey, Tim, your military background, your skills that you have, those align with these 50 jobs, right? So what we're taught is that every job should have a resume tailored specifically to that job. You just told me I have to make 50 versions of my resume. Oh, I told you I hate resumes.
Mm-hmm.
So one, now I'm modifying my resume 50 times. Two, I'm trying to get through your applicant tracking system or your human capital management platform, whatever it is, like what's the mysterious keyword solution that I have to pass through to get through that. So that's so strike one, strike two. And then we talked about the recruiters like literally giving 7 seconds to look at a resume. So if I made it through gate 1 to gate 2, I have to make it through gate 3 of a resume, or a recruiter that doesn't, most of them have no idea about the military, but they're supposed to have my translated resume of what that means in 7 seconds. So what we're doing is a little bit different, right? So like we talk to companies that are intentional about hiring veterans, and that's where I always go. If you're not intentional about hiring veterans, we're not a good partner, And I don't have a problem saying that, because I'm not going to chase and waste my time on somebody that doesn't, because I'm wasting veterans' time as well. Because there's so many of us that are out here like that. One of the things that gets me fired up in the morning, if I can just pull up LinkedIn, I can see a veteran that has that green open to work sign. I'm like, oh, we need to talk. Right. So like that's my motivation. I hate it when people struggle, because we go from high performers and all of a sudden we're like, man, I can't remember how to tie my shoe, how to write a resume, how to do any of this stuff. And we're like, you're still a high performer. We're just not communicating that. So what we're doing different for a company that says we intentionally hire veterans, they have access to our platform and they can literally filter by anything that they want. They can filter by geographic, like where did you join? Like that's a critical one, right? So when I talked about the farmer that says, how do I get my kid back? Or somebody in rural Nebraska saying, how do I find people that want to do this? Well, this guy came from there. This veteran came from there. They're not coming back for 6 months, because they can build a profile as early on as they want. And So when they know that they're wanting to go back home, the employers can then reach out to that veteran and be like, hey, I'm going to help you with your offboard process from the service, and I'm going to help you onboard onto this organization. The National Guard and the reserve units those guys are all over the country as well, right? Like they're rural everywhere, USA. So that's also another option that's in there. So the employers can filter based off of so many things, right? So like we talked about the ASVAB, they're able to filter based off of that test. If you want to put somebody through your maintenance technician program, guess what? Like the veterans, they'll tell you like this is what my scores were. So I can tell you if they're going to be good mechanically or good electrically. Like I know that, right? Tell you like where I come from. You can look for the degrees, the skills. Yeah, the skill. Everything is skills based. So even our primary job that gets translated over. Your rank gets translated over. Your primary job, your additional duties, because there's additional duties, right? So infantry guy, man, when we had somebody that was good on the computer, yeah, they were good on the computer all the time, right? Like, so that was a great additional duty, but you have all those skills, like those are skills that you have access to. So then the other thing that I did was I started to ask these partner employers, and like during pitch days and stuff, I'm like, if you get 7 seconds to look at a resume, what do you want to see in that 7 seconds? Every single recruiter I've talked to, and there's a lot of them, skills. I want to know what skills you have and how, like if you could quantify those skills, like I am this good at turning wrenches, like that's a whole different ball game, right? Like I'm in the startup. I'm not trying to figure out a competency level for any of those, but like that might be a down the road type of thing. But if you built out a profile with us on our platform, you'll see like you have 0 to 5 years of this list of skills. You have 5 to 10 years, 5 to 10 plus of this level of skills or these types of skills. So that just says how many years, right? So like it doesn't say that you're extremely proficient at turning wrenches, but if you've been turning wrenches for 10 years and you don't have a proficiency level, well, there's probably a bigger question, right?
Why do companies want to hire veterans? So when I was leaving the service, I heard about it all the time. Oh, there's tons of people waiting to hire those vets and blah. And I don't know if that was necessarily true or similar to a lot of the people you probably work with today. I didn't know how to kind of break through that barrier. But what are some of the reasons a company would want to seek out and hire veterans specifically?
A lot of it, like it starts with the initial, like the soft skills, right? Like the accountability is, when I talk about accountability to groups, I always get everybody backs up like, ooh, that's almost a dirty word today, right? But we are accountable to ourselves. We're accountable to others. Like, and the accountability piece is big. Like if I know I'm not pulling my weight and you can tell me, hey, Tim, you need to step it up. Like I get it, right? I'm going to show up. That we've all been through some level of education, of higher education. It may be in the form of technical training, but we all have that, right? Like we understand customs and courtesies. We understand processes. We understand procedures. We understand how to elevate a problem. Like we understand how to communicate. There's so many soft skills across the board from a veteran's perspective that we get to share, right? Like, and those are just ingrained in us. And when we get into the civilian sector, if we look across the board and we're like, what are you doing? Like, just had to be here at 8:00. Like it's not that hard to show up on time. But those are natural things to us, right? Like you just didn't want to show up today. Oh, okay, got it, right? But yeah, so there's a lot of the soft skills. But the other piece is this, like we've been trained into something, but that doesn't mean that that's what we want to do on the civilian sector, right? Like all those infantry folks, all the artillery. So another thing too is like cooks. Okay, there's not a lot. There are some that want to be a cook, right? But that's not everybody wants to be a cook. But just because you were a cook in the military doesn't mean that that's what you want to do in the civilian sector. So, and this is kind of where we're gravitating towards, like in our platform, is using some of the data driven stuff. And Tana, you're gonna appreciate this too, knowing what you guys can do. Is when we start to take that data and be like, okay, so you were a cook, but you scored high mechanically here, and you have some experience with this. Like, it's gonna start saying, here's some areas that maybe you should start to consider, right? Like, maybe these are some things that you should be looking at. So yeah, all of those things, like, just because of what you did is good, but doesn't mean that that's what you have to do while you're on the civilian sector. Like, you're not stuck doing that particular job. There's a couple of areas of things on the translation or the transition side that as veterans we struggle with. One of them is the compensation, right? Like, everybody says that we should be making way more money than what we currently are. Like, no kidding. 2000 is when I separated from the Marine Corps. And they're like, okay, you were an E5, you should be making 75 to 100K. And I'm like, hell yeah, I should, right? So, like, they were paying me that kind of money back then. But that's the thing, is like, we all like have this inflated compensation expectation. So, like, that's not a reality, right? Like, that's not realistic, you know? So then that part just, it needs to be tweaked. That's seriously another question that I'm getting from a lot of employers. Like, who's telling you guys that you're worth $500,000 a year? Or, like, who says you guys need to make six figures? It's six or bust, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know where it's coming from, but we need to address the reality of some of those things, right? So there's two areas. So, like, normally when I talk to a vet that's been in for more than 10 years, I always ask them, like, what do you want to do? And they always say, well, not always, but if you would categorize them, I want to be an HR manager, or I want to be a project manager. And I'm like, okay, let's back that up a little bit. Like, why are you saying those things? And it seems like it's a buzzword as we transition out. Like, I manage people. Well, that makes you a people manager, not necessarily an HR manager. Like, there's a difference, right? Like, you're a leader of people. Doesn't mean that you're in charge of those people processes, right? So, like, but when I talk about that, I'm like, let's talk about payroll and compensation. And the first thing they're like, well, we never had to do that. I'm like, yes, that's an entire vertical in the HR world, like, let's talk about benefits. Like, we never had to worry about that. I was like, exactly. Another thing, like, we could talk about succession plans and all those other things that are in the HR side, but not everybody relates to that. Like, we don't have those experiences while we're in, but you want to get paid as the technical expert that understands all of those. I'm like, so just think about that. And then, the next thing is, like, the project management side. Like, I love all the efforts that are out there, like all the certs and stuff that we can get now. Like, those things it's amazing, right? So, like, those credentialing platforms are awesome for us vets. But for everybody to say, hey, I want to be a project manager, like, let's talk about your budget, right? Like, did you work a budget? Well, no, the budget was set. Okay, like, budget is so big on the projects, right? So it's like, but yeah, anyway, so there's a lot of misconceptions from the veteran side as we come out, and those things need to be addressed. Like, the reality side of that needs to be addressed, because even on the one-on-ones, they want to talk to vets one-on-one. Like, that's literally like, how come nobody's telling us this? I'm like, I don't know, guys. Like, we need to, like, we can do better, right?
How much one-on-one coaching are you providing for each person you're working with?
Currently, I am not able to keep up with everybody one-on-one, right? Like, but the goal for us, like, one of the internal goals that I've set for Major Talent is that every single veteran and every candidate that signs up on the platform will get a one-on-one conversation, right? Like, we need to do that. So, first off, because we need to make sure that your profile is complete, your profile makes sense, so that way, so when the veteran, the profile is done, like, it's a good product for them, and it's a good product for the employer that's actually searching for those profiles, right? So, like, I always talk about data, right? Garbage in and garbage out. Like, let's get some good stuff, something that's substantial that's in there, and just to have people to walk through their entire career with them and be like, did we capture everything that's going to make you the most marketable? And then we can start to add some other stuff that's in there. Like, these are the things that you really want to do, right? And then, so, like, for the guy I just talked to yesterday, quick conversation. We chatted for 45 minutes. How his approach was to trying to get into the federal system was, it wasn't working, right? And 45 minutes with us, we chatted about, hey, here's a better plan. Let's look at this better option. And he emailed me tonight. He's like, dude, I've got like 4 people that are calling me right now, and I have a one-on-one with the hiring manager. I'm like, great, that's how it works, right? So,
Tim, what are the top 3 things you think that someone could do to dramatically increase their odds of getting some recognition, getting a call back, getting that interview, and maybe landing that job?
we talk about networking, like how do you network? How do you get into those things? Building the network is probably one of the most underrated things, but we talk about it like build your network. A lot of people say your network is your net worth. It is what it is, like however you define that, but your network really opens up the doors, So I would say 1, build your network. 2, there's a human on the other side, right? Like there's a recruiter, like everything is not automated. Yes, most of the process is automated, but there's a human on the other side. And if you talk to any recruiter, the first thing they say is, if I talk to somebody, like if I actually have a conversation with you, I will know we're going to make the connection, right? And at that point, it's like, okay, you're not getting through the system. I haven't seen your application, or maybe I've seen your resume, but I don't understand your resume. Like it breaks down all those barriers and opens up that conversation for a one-on-one. And recruiters want to have those conversations because like nobody wants to sit here and look at resumes all day for, 7-10 seconds. Like, yep, nope. Like we don't want to do that. Like we want to actually talk to people. And as crazy as it is and all the automated stuff, like on both sides, the candidate wants to have a conversation and the recruiter wants to have a conversation, but we're stuck with this process in the middle. Again, why we're saying we're intentional about it. Like if you have a conversation with somebody that's your major talent, you can tell them to apply after you've had the initial conversation, right? Like at that point, hey, I need you into our platform because we're going to start this onboarding process. Cool. Like that has to make sense. So yeah, the networking first. And then the second one is like just being a little bit more assertive. Like the passive applications doesn't necessarily work. And my third one for veterans is honestly, it's again based off the network. First thing I will do to access into a company is look for the vets, right? Like we take care of ourselves. Like there's a lot of inter-service rivalry. Like while we're in here, we always talk a lot of smack about each other, like Marines love crayons and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, if one of us was struggling in the street, the next one, doesn't matter the branch, they're going to step in, they're going to help, right? Like we're vets, we love each other, and we're going to try to take care of each other. So like understanding that part of it. So like if you're the candidate trying to get in and that there's a veteran that's in there, reach out to them like that's, and then just say, hey, who's the hiring manager, right? So like start to circulate that. And then the other side is this, like, we can't forget where we came from. And that's so easy to do, right? Like, it's so easy to be like, well, I have this job now. I'm happy. I got a paycheck. I'm taking care of my family, and I'm doing all the things. But when you have another vet that reaches out to you, I feel like we have an obligation to help them, right? Like, we may not have the solution, but I think that maybe you have a network, or maybe you have a connection, or maybe you have, something that way, right? Again, the recruiters love to have, we love to talk, right? Like recruiters just love to talk. So if you get an opportunity, spend $2 on a cup of coffee for somebody and take a recruiter out and be like, hey, can I grab coffee with you and just walk me through this process? I want to share my resume. Like once you have a recruiter down, you're chatting for coffee, just say, hey, look, I need some help, and like the human nature side of things. Like if you're looking at me and you're saying, hey, Tim, I need some help. Dude, I don't know. I don't care if you need me to knit your socks. Like, I'll figure it out. Like, I'll help you, or else I'll find somebody else. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, when a human looks at another human and says, can you help me? Like, I feel like we were like, okay, yeah, I got you. Like, so it's okay to ask for help. And I think that's probably, if I had to put number 4 on there, I could replace that one with number 3 or number 1. Doesn't matter.
Well said. So I want to shift real quick to major talent in and of itself. Is it about 2 years old, right?
Well, so we started this thing in August of like 22. So
Okay.
I had this, what I was doing manually, like I was literally like 2 veterans a month. I would take their resume, totally strip it of anything military related, so it looked like you worked for that part, the department of the brand of the, you worked for the Army. Didn't say you were with this cavalry division and blah 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 blah. Like, so I stripped all the military out of it. So like the Army was your employer, and I was doing like 1 or 2 a month, and I got connected with somebody. She's my mentor now. She's like overall mentor. She's phenomenal, and I remember like we were sitting down having coffee, and she's like, it's like, this is my passion. Like, this is my purpose. I really feel like this is why God put me on this earth. Is like, life's not about me. Like, I can really help others because that's just how I'm wired. In that conversation, she was like, hey, instead of doing 1 or 2 a month, why don't we build this tech platform and just, you can help thousands at a time. And I'm like, yeah, sounds great. I'm a business guy. Like, I'm not a tech person, right? And she's like, that's okay, because there's other people that are wired, to do the tech side of things. And she's like, we can connect you. We can surround you with that. And she's like, I need you to read this book. It's called Who Not How. And I'm telling you guys, like, if you ever read that book, that book changed my perspective in life, right? Because like, what you're wired for is what you're wired for. Like, I could spend a lot of time doing something else that somebody else is really good at. But yeah, Who Not How. I love it. It was a game changer for me. So anyway, so I started that process, and like my entrepreneurial journey was amazing. I was introduced to the startup community here in Omaha, and that's been phenomenal. I tried a couple of different approaches to launching this thing, and first one did not go how I wanted it to go. Second one is I had some friends that were like, hey, we're gonna do this thing for free, and I'm like, heck yeah. And then 3 months in, I'm like, guys, you're busy. Like, this isn't working. And then my CTO, he's my CTO now. I'll never forget it, because after I got done with that, I reached out to him. I'm like, hey, man, like, I'm back to square one. Like, I need some help. He goes, great, we got you right where we need you now. I'm like, so, and he didn't mean it in like a mean way, but it was just like you need to figure out, like, we're here to help you, and it was. So then I applied for the prototype grant from the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, and I was expecting probably $50K on that, and they ended up awarding me $100K, which is I was just humbled by that. Move Venture Fund, they invested in me early as part of that to help unlock that prototype grant. I pitched a Husker Venture Fund. They also jumped in on the early side there, so they helped me out as well there. And we started going down this path, and we literally launched like not even 2 months ago. Like, so the journey leading up to has been awesome. There's been so much activity. There's been so much traction, and like the conversations I have with the vets now is I'm getting the same response. All the vets like, yeah, we need this, right? Because like it literally translates their entire career into something that civilian understands, right? Like, it doesn't say you were a sergeant. It says that you were a manager, a senior manager, a senior team leader. It doesn't say that you were a major. It says you were a director or, whatever. So like, it takes your rank and it translates that to the corporate side. It takes your job code and pulls out all those technical skills that you have. So those are on there. It takes out your primary job, your additional duties, all those schools that we went to while we're in the service. It takes all those out. And it says what the actual school was about, right? So like, for example, Airman Leadership School, I would have people come and ask me like, hey, Tim, what is this resume? This guy went to Airman Leadership School. Does that mean, are they a general or something? I'm like, no, that's an introductory level leadership course. They're like, oh, okay. So like, those are all called out, right? So like, the translation automatically happens. So what happens is there's this translated profile that's at the end, and that's what the employers get to see. But when that translation is done, also, when their profile is complete, there's actually a resume that the veterans can have. Like, it's a free resume for them. They can take it, shop with it, they can modify it, whatever they want to do. Like, it at least gives them something to work with, and it's a skills-based resume of everything that they have is translated.
It's so amazing when you can align your work with something that brings an immense amount of value and people really genuinely want.
Yeah, it is. And you know, the hardest part for me is like I want things to be right. You know what I mean? Like I want things to be done really well. I would say like in my startup journey, the hardest part is to getting to an MVP and like getting feedback on that MVP, you know, because when people are like, Tim, this doesn't work. Well, this didn't work. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want it to work. Like I want everything to be good. And because you want to give a, you know, you want to give a good product and to give a great service to our vets and just wrapping your mind around like, hey, you have an 80% solution. You're going to continue to build off of that. Like, dude, that is so hard.
In startups, you're building the plane while you're trying to fly it. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
pretty rough. If you're a veteran or a military spouse looking for a job, or if you're part of an organization looking to hire veterans specifically, where can people reach out to you, like your company? Where can they go first?
Yeah. Go to majortalent.com. That's we're on all the social media. So our website's majortalent.com. And that will direct you right to our platform. If you're a candidate, you can build your candidate's profile. If you're an employer that wants to hire veterans or military spouses, you can go on there as well. And then we have, you know, the options. So we have pretty flexible packages that you can have access to our veterans that way. We're on all the socials. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. Sorry. So
We're still figuring that out too, saying the wrong thing.
yeah, right. Doesn't help when Elon puts it out there like, "Hey guys, do you like Twitter better or X?" I'm like, dude, you changed the name a year
Too
ago.
late
Like,
now.
yeah. So
Well, awesome, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing what you're doing, the problem that you're solving, and just being a resource for people who genuinely need it. Because coming from the staffing world prior and knowing just how hard it is for civilian people to get a job, I can't. It's eye-opening to me now, just realizing how much challenges that someone who's only had a military career and lived that world, only spoke that language, is
yeah,
now going into this new paradigm and just completely bright-eyed and going like, "Oh my goodness, I don't know any of this." So it's
yeah,
pretty amazing.
yeah, man. Thanks for realizing that too and saying that. So yeah, that's good.
Well, we'd like to thank everybody who has made it to the end of the episode. If you're still here, make sure to share with somebody who you think might get something from the podcast, and get them connected up with Tim if they align well and are looking for a new job. And past that, we will see everybody next week. Bye-bye.